Jake Dunlop. I am the chair of the board of directors at Wedgwood. I've been with Wedgwood now since 2016, so I guess that's 5 years, almost 6 years coming up in January. And I've been the chair of the board this year, and then I was chair of the operations committee before that.
Great. What got you involved initially?
Yeah, that's a good question. Rich Antonini, who was a past board chair, we had some mutual clients, and so he actually introduced me to Wedgwood. They were looking for some board members. He reached out and said, "Hey, would you be interested?" I actually had never even heard of Wedgwood, so I looked at the website. I'm like, "Yeah, this lines up kind of with our values." So with me and my wife, Christina, and I said, "Yeah, I think that's something I'd be interested in doing."
Great. So like you said, you're currently serving as the chairperson of the executive board of directors. What does that entail, and what does the board of directors do?
Yeah, good question. From a high level, the board of directors is kind of the strategic vision group, right? So we are always working with Dan, the CEO, and other leadership team members to kind of take a high level look at where we want to see the organization go, what it's doing, and how we can help move it along. I think from a high level, it's always policy, right? So we always say, board sets the policy, and that the leadership team then sets the procedures to implement those policies as to where we're going. So from a high level, that's kind of my view of the board, is kind of strategic direction.
Okay.
From a chair perspective, so I chair the executive committee of the board, which are the different committee chairs themselves, all constitute the executive committee. And we are in charge of doing the CEO evaluation. And then we kind of will maybe consult with Dan more frequently on kind of not day to day, but more in the weeds kind of questions or ideas he wants to bounce off of us that he doesn't need to bring to the full board.
Gotcha. So what does it mean to you to serve on the board?
For me, serving on the board is really a calling. It's I told you earlier, I really had no connection to Wedgwood at all, other than Rich reaching out, and my wife and I reflect on that frequently, going, "Man, how did I end up here? How did this happen?" It was really random. And then when I got on the board, I think the youngest person on the board too. I sit down at the first board meeting, like looking around, like, how did I get on this board? And a few years later here, now I'm chairing it. So for me, it's a calling. It's kind of, all part of God's plan that I'm there, which is pretty exciting. When you see things like that in your life materialize like that. So I'd say for me, serving on the board's a calling. It's something kind of right place, right time. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. So yeah, that's.
So the last year and a half has been challenging for all of us, Wedgwood included. What has been encouraging to you through it all, and what is giving you hope for the future?
I think a couple things. I guess I'd say number one, I think you can see God's working in all of it, right? And so every organization has had challenges, including Wedgwood. But through it all, God's been faithful. And we've had people, at the beginning of the pandemic, nobody knew what was happening, right? We didn't know how serious it was. Everybody was at home. We know a lot more now, but if you look back in hindsight, we really didn't know how serious. But at the same time, you had direct care staff here coming to work every day, still fulfilling the mission here and helping the kids here. So for me, that was probably the biggest takeaway or the biggest encouragement I saw. And also the community support still.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw a lot of that we have partners that stuck by us through it, even if their businesses may have been struggling. So I think there's just been a lot of support, both internally and externally, that's been encouraging to me.
Yeah. How do you describe Wedgwood to your friends and colleagues?
Yeah. So anytime you're on a board, I think you got to be passionate, right, about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so for me personally, that's, there's always residential care. I think a lot of people understand that and know that Wedgwood is a leader in residential care. It's almost a given, I think, to a lot of people. And if not, I'm happy to talk to people about that. But usually they kind of understand what Wedgwood's doing from that perspective. And so for me, there's kind of three things I'm always talking about to people. One is the autism program. I think that's a lesser known thing that Wedgwood does, but it's doing amazing work with really young children and having amazing outcomes for them if you identify that early and get the right treatment. And so there's some success stories that have been shared with us at the board level that are just awesome. It's inspiring. So that's one I like to talk about because people don't necessarily know or associate Wedgwood with that. The second one's the SUD program.
Yeah.
Again, Wedgwood's been a leader in adolescent drug treatment for a long, long time. But when it comes to helping adults or families doing that, that's something that's a little bit more recent for the organization, but something that's really cool and a big part of the organization and what we're doing. And the last one's the ETP program. So I love the employment training is pretty cool. I mean, there's been gifts we've given to family members for car detailing for Christmas or ordering off their Etsy shop. So it's just, there are some really cool things going on here in addition to the residential care that's been the baseline for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really amazing how much Wedgwood does that people don't know about.
Yes. Yeah. So much good work.
I guess kind of bouncing off of that, what do you think makes Wedgwood a unique and special place?
I think what makes Wedgwood unique, I think, is the faith-based component, right? It's the transformative services part is what we call it, right? That, there are donor dollars that are used to advance the faith-based vision for the organization. And so I don't think, when you look at the types of kids that Wedgwood is serving, especially in residential care, I mean, they are really damaged and they're really hurting. And I don't know that you can transform those kids' lives without that part of it, without that piece of it. You need the God piece, you need the faith piece. And so for me, that's what sets Wedgwood apart. And I think it's also what gives Wedgwood so many positive outcomes in the kids that they serve.
Do you have a favorite Wedgwood moment?
I have a lot of favorite Wedgwood moments. And I think so we're really fortunate on the board. We get to hear a lot of success stories, and I know they're not all success stories, right? That wouldn't be realistic, but we get to hear stuff all the time. And I think of, we were just at the annual dinner, right? And you get to hear a situation where somebody came through Wedgwood's care and they look back on it and see, they tell you how it impacted their life, how they're able to have a productive, a healthy family now that they probably wouldn't have had before without breaking a cycle or getting the help they needed. And so there's stories like that all the time. And I remember hearing a staff member, and I'm going to mess up some of the details, but I remember a staff member talking about how they were buying some gifts for kids at Wedgwood, I think for around Christmas time. And they were checking out and the cashier asked what it was for. And she said, I was in Wedgwood's care. I wouldn't have been here without, it's stuff like that. You just hear the huge impact that Wedgwood is having on the community in known and unknown ways. There's a lot of stories we're never going to hear, but they're success stories too. And so I'm always inspired by the stories we hear every year at the annual dinner. There's somebody, there's so many lives that are impacted by this organization. And I feel fortunate to be able to play a really, really small part.
What has become clear to you about Wedgwood during your time on the board?
I think two things. Number one is that God is faithful. He's seen us through this pandemic, kind of relating to your earlier question, but God has been faithful to this organization as it's morphed over the years. There's just more and more opportunities that have come about for us to help people and to help families. Number two is the community support. I think I had no idea how much community support Wedgwood had coming in, but if you've ever played in the golf outing or attended it, it is probably the most sponsored and busiest golf outing in West Michigan. And so you start to see, how many organizations really care about it and sponsor it every year. So that it's been really encouraging, but definitely something I didn't know before I was on the board.
Yeah, and the golf outing, I'm starting to run out of room on some of my sponsorship posters, but it's a great problem to have.
Yes.
So you've been involved with Wedgwood through serving and support for several years. What keeps you invested in this organization?
What keeps me invested? I think, again, I'm going to get back to a prior answer a little bit, but I think that I just feel called to be here. It doesn't, again, my wife, Christina, and I reflect all the time, like somehow I'm the youngest person on this board. Somehow, I had no connection. Everybody else was on the foundation board or had volunteered or had all these connections. And it's just, I don't believe in coincidences that way. And so it's just where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's exciting because of that. I feel called to do it.
Well, it's important when the meetings are at 7 a.m. that you feel called to be there.
Yes, definitely.
Why do you think it's important for people to actively engage with organizations and causes that are important to them?
Yeah, I think that's important. For me personally, as a Christian person in West Michigan, that's just something that you have to do. I mean, if we are called biblically to do that, right? I mean, Jesus calls us all to help the orphan, to help the widow, to help and so for me personally, it's just a calling, and it's something again that we all need to be doing, and it's all going to contribute to making our community a better place. And the other thing I'd say is, we I personally come from a pretty privileged situation. I had a very stable home life, a loving family, and not everybody has that. And so, this is our opportunity to try to help some of those people that weren't given the same opportunities, and it's really important work.
How have you seen God moving here at Wedgwood? You shared some of the stories, but are there other things that have really touched you as you've been on the board?
Yeah, the ones I shared are some of the most
Hmm.
touching for sure. But I think I think a couple things. I mean, there are some as we've moved through this pandemic. I mean, we've definitely seen God's hands and feet at work. There are just some unique opportunities that have shown because of the pandemic, and so you just see God working. And hey, maybe this door is shutting, but this one is opening, right?
Hmm.
Or maybe we need to rework this to look a little bit different because of the pandemic. There's telehealth now, and there's different opportunities to do things differently than we did before. And maybe that's just the optimist in me too. But I,
Hmm.
I think it's God opening doors for the organization.
Yeah. Is there one thing about Wedgwood or the work that this organization does that you think people would be surprised to know?
I think I keep getting back to my earlier answer, so I
No,
apologize. But I
that's totally
think I,
fine.
I think like I was saying earlier with the autism program, the SUD services, the ETP. I mean, there is a lot of things going on here that people don't know about. They don't, and I try to be the biggest advocate I can be in the
Hmm.
community to say, hey, you guys don't know. I mean, Wedgwood does residential care, and that's super important, and that's been the core forever. And so I'm not trying to discount that at all. I mean, but that's a baseline, and we know we do that well. But we do all these other things well too, and we're really helping a lot of people. When they again talk of the autism program, I mean, they're doing potty training for kids with autism that are really really young. That's huge. I mean,
Hmm.
to get that, or to be able to attend a general education class instead of a special ed class, that changes the trajectory of what your life looks like.
Yeah.
And SUD treatment. I mean, if you can find a way to solve that issue, we've heard frequently that a lot of times it's not the first time, it's not the second, it might be the 10th time you enter a program like that it
Hmm.
finally works. But when it does finally work, that impacts not only that person but their entire family.
Yeah.
So it's really amazing work. It's really important work, and I'm just proud to be like I say, a very small part of it.
Well, Jake, thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this conversation, and thank you for serving on Wedgwood's board of directors and supporting our mission. Your servant leadership is making a difference for this organization, our staff, and those in our care. It was wonderful to talk with you today.
Thank you for having me.